As I said, I want to discuss the economic situation in the countries covered by the Economic Commission for Europe. Obviously, Europe and the United States are central to the global picture, so Alfredo has pretty much covered that for the time being. I'll make a few comments about that. I want to then make just a few comments about the situation in the economies in transition. And then I want to discuss the downside scenario, in other words, what could go wrong with our central forecast, and then discuss in a little more detail about our policy advice as to how the situation could be improved above what our baseline forecast is. Looking now first just at the Commonwealth of Independent States, in other words, the situation there really is one of moderate growth. This was a very negatively impacted region of the world, but since the crisis, they have been able to bounce back fairly well and experience moderate growth this year, as well as next year. 3.8 is not extremely high, but nevertheless, given that they have very low population growth, that's a fairly solid number. Nevertheless, it's below the pre-crisis level of growth. Growth in Europe, the other European economies, Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine is lower, while growth in Central Asia is higher. The labor market dynamics in the region are very favorable. In other words, Russia basically has reached full employment and has reached a historic low of unemployment for the country. In the rest of the CIS, employment is once again fairly well, but it's higher in Ukraine. And in a lot of the countries, Central Asia and so forth, migration is very important as an outlet for workers in order to keep unemployment low. Inflation is quite moderate in the region despite some poor crop yields. Historically, it's been close to double digits, but it's really forecast to be about 5% this year in Russia and much of the CIS. It's higher in some of the CIS countries as well as in Belarus following its currency crisis of last year. The sovereign wealth funds that were used significantly to mitigate the crisis in 2009 and 10 have been built back up by Russia, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan. Private capital outflows continue to be a persistent problem for the region. This reduces the funds available for investment and is a problem. Remittances which are quite important in the region, have generally recovered from their 30% drop that they experienced during the crisis. They're back to pre-crisis levels, and in some cases above that. The whole region has a significant problem with a high export concentration in commodities. This lowers employment and productivity growth, and this is a fundamental long-run problem for the region. The major vulnerability going forward for the region is basically a deterioration of the Eurozone crisis. This would reduce exports to the region. It would lower the world price for oil, which is very important to a number of Russia and a number of the countries, and it would reduce their access to external finance, which they're still dependent on. Nevertheless, I think the overall assessment would be that the region is less vulnerable to external developments now than they were in 2008, because the region is less dependent on external capital to finance their development. I might mention that there's a box in the report discussing Russia's 2012 accession to the WTO. Russia was the largest country outside of the WTO and had pursued membership for over 18 years. So the box discusses the provisions of that accession. Basically, they're fairly standard, reduced tariffs. They opened up some services markets, even though there's still some significant restrictions there. Reduced barriers to FDI, and promised to reduce some government interventions in their economy. The objectives of them joining basically are to diversify their economy into more manufactured products, increase FDI flows, which would bring in more technology, increase productivity growth, and create a more predictable business climate that would stimulate investment generally. In order to achieve the objectives that they want to from their accession, basically it's going to be necessary for them to implement a number of complementary domestic policies. These include improved safety nets and training for the workers that can be displaced by the trade changes, and improved governance so they can take advantage of the possibility of increased FDI. Now,